Hello, Dennis here with some product planning planned for today. It's stream number 15 already. Time flies by so fast. Hello, everybody. I think we have about 15, 20 people in chat already. Let me know if you're here. Hello, hello. Let me know why you showed up today, what you're expecting to find here. We are definitely covering a lot of topics on the product side today. So, all of you engineers, it is still relevant to you. But we are talking today about that little annoying thing that we call planning, estimation, roadmap building, or just negotiation on the product or stakeholder side. The agenda for today is seemingly very simple, but obviously the devil's in the details. So we're talking about the risks of not having a plan, how to use estimation data, or rather how to use data from whatever management software you're using to augment, replace, or add another data point in adjacent to estimations if you're into that, and how to avoid the endless meetings that come with these conversations. That's generally the most, I would say, the most heavily criticized aspect of software engineering is that we might spend hours and hours and hours in meetings, and then it's seemingly the more a project is behind, the more complex a project is, the more we spend on meetings rather than actually, building something and talking to customers. So I see my chat is out of sync, so that's going to be a constant problem. I won't refresh it right now, so I have a backup plan. So we're on the backup right now. So the problem is we don't have a backup for the backup, so we'll just have to live with that. Ivan, Ricardo, Angel, Jose, hello, Thomas. It's great to see you. So we already had a question in my announcement post from Adam Dimitruk. Adam asked if we're going to cover slices. So for those of you who don't know, slices in this context would mean the usage of event models as a means of planning a project. So event modeling, if you're used to the concept, event modeling takes into account two different types of, let's say, vertical or like topology. One is the aspect of building it for the sake of figuring out what the events are, what the sort of set in stone facts of the system are. That's more tactical, but it also has a strategic element, which is talking about if I need, the project is complex where compute happens on the data. So every logical unit of compute around the data logically will correlate to about the same amount of work that you would assume to be one story or one ticket. So event modeling can also be used as this thing that just has a story of computes, of data manipulation, and you treat that as your project plan rather than artificially doing it with a story, with a ticket, as you would the other way around. Usually you would do, somebody talks about a feature, that feature then gets distilled into business plans, and then that business plan gets distilled into a story. That story then gets picked up by an engineer. That engineer then writes up a spec or creates an idea or a prototype or a test, and then you implement that. The problem is then that the thing that you'll be implementing is being decided at the last minute as it's being worked on, where the event model does the other way around. You don't know how it will connect and in what order it will be done, but at least you document the minimum viable data streams, let's say the minimum viable data manipulations that happen regarding project planning, right? So you take each element of data manipulation, then is a slice in that terminology. We'll get to that if you're interested. We have a few questions already. So there's the question of, hi Dennis here. This topic is essential, yet it rarely results in a sense of satisfaction for engineering or product management. Yes. So what I want to know from you guys is, what do you do to set up product plan? How do you set deadlines? How do you set the roadmap? How do you set your project? How do you plan? What documents do you produce? What meetings do you have? Is it recurring? Is it, I recently saw this. I recently saw this idea about Scrum versus Kanban. On Kanban, you focus on one thing and then you finish when that one thing is done. In Scrum, you focus on the week and it's done when the week is over, right? So it's this: are we doing it hourly or are we doing it Are we doing it value-wise? So I really like that distinction. So how do you do your work? Is it routine? Are you synchronizing effort on some increment on the calendar? Or are you synchronizing effort of this feature now, this feature is 2 months, this feature now, this feature is 1 day, this feature now, this feature is 2 weeks? So are you doing feature A, feature B, feature C, or are we doing week A, week B, week C, week D? Right? So are you more on the Scrum camp? Are you more in the waterfall camp? Are you more in the something in between camp? That I would like to know from you today. So I know Angel and Ivan and others are on the coding retreat. I will be joining you tomorrow, I assume, for a short call if you're doing some katas or just for a quick chat. So there's that. And we also had a question. Thank you for this, Dennis. I also had a question. Now, I also don't know who you are because you have your privacy settings turned up. Victor, hello. Adrian, hello. Yes. Oh, there's also Dennis. Yes. Will I be discussing SAFe? So I'm not a proponent of SAFe. All of the experts that I follow on this topic say that SAFe is just a waste of time. So I haven't tried it. I'm not working in organizations large enough to even be aware of SAFe. So I don't know. I'm tempted to just badmouth SAFe for being silly, but I have no data on this, no hands-on data on this. I would say SAFe is probably something you don't need right now, unless you're already using it, in which case there's nothing to discuss to that matter. So SAFe being scale, is it scaled agile framework? Is that what acronym? I think that's what the acronym means, right? Yeah. So this idea of scaling agile teams into multiple agile teams, I think we just read Team of Teams on the book club. To me, this looks like control, not like teams. So if you give me SAFe, it's a manager's wet dream looking at the diagrams. But maybe I don't understand the diagrams, or maybe I don't understand the types of companies that would need something like this. So like my area from which I'm looking at it might be completely the wrong. I'm possibly not the target audience for SAFe, so I can't comment on it. But it's a good question. Thank you for raising it. So let's start with let's make a marker. Let's start with actually what happens. What's the risk of not having a plan? I just want to share something I highlighted very quickly on Excalidraw for a meeting, because with one of my clients, so some of you might not know this, but I am actually not a content creator by default. I'm a technologist, I'm a coach. And usually what I talk about on streams is what organically happens to me at work. So then I often anonymize my discussions and anonymize my work, and then I talk about it, because if companies that I work with have these problems today, then it might be relevant to you as well. And this is possibly the freshest education, or at least entertainment, that I can give you that might be relevant to you, because why else would you watch it live? So on this aspect, the whole idea of why are we managing risk is because we want to make sure that let's say the C-suite, if your company has a C-suite, can make the important decisions from like a really strategic top level. And those 3 important decisions from a strategic top level are kill the project, add manpower, extend deadline. Right? So that would be renegotiate terms. Right? So that's the decisions they want to make. And usually we estimate projects. So we, as in the CTO side, the operational side, the business technology side, like depending on how it's structured. This is an example of a small to medium business where there is a mix of operational scaling and technology on the technical side, and the product planning is more on the CPO side, not so much on the CTO side. There are companies where the CTO is the main product person, or there isn't a CTO, but there is a VP of product and engineering. I believe Synthesia has a setup like that. I know because one of their VP of engineering and product is from Slovenia. So shout out to all the Slovenian technologists in the audience. So our first topic is, what's the risk? The risk is that all of these decisions are harmful if made at the end of the project. Right, so the only thing, the people who are not actively included, so that would usually be the non-technical product people, let's say, the non-technical business people, the stakeholders, the managers, the second line managers, the business analysts, the CEO, the CFO, the CPO, the CTO, depending, again, CTO in this case might be more tactical and operational or managerial. But everybody who isn't directly an independent contributor will want to only do those three things. Right? So that's why they ask, when will it be done? They don't actually want to know when will it be done. They want to know, will it be done before I will want to kill it? Or will it be done before I will lose the opportunity to do something? Because if not, I might want to add manpower. Right? So there's always a why, like done by then why. And usually we forget about this part, but this is the most important part. We need to understand the why they want estimates, why they want projections, right? So I also want to separate out that mostly what we want is to give them a projection. That's the deadline. Okay, we will honor it. We will guarantee that we will get something useful out by the deadline, or we will guarantee that we will get this out by the deadline. More on that later. So the C-suite, the stakeholders want to make these three decisions. And this also works for any kind of arrangement. This works for agencies, and with an agency, the client might say, okay, well, I'm paying you monthly. So at the end of each billing cycle, I need to know whether we need more or if I need to kill the project, or if I need to extend a little bit, or if it's your fault and we extend and I don't pay, right? Like that's typical, like agency style handling of a project. But you can also do it internally, externally, in a startup, whatever. So again, the point is, these decisions are harmful or impossible at the end of a project. When you're close to that thing that's important to them. Like at the end of a project, I mean, it is scoped, there's some expectations set, end of the project might be the last day of a weekly project, or the last month of a yearly project, or something that is towards the end. Even though it won't be finished, there is a milestone, let's say, or a deadline, or a large deliverable that has outwards market consequences, not just deployment, if you're deploying continuously. So this is Brooks's law as well, Fred Brooks, right? So adding manpower, adding personnel to a project that is late will make it later, right? So the context here is that you can't add manpower at the end of a late project. You have to add it early. It works. You can add manpower early, but it has to be early. So you have to know at the beginning of the project whether to add or not, or what project to add manpower on and what projects to not add manpower on. Okay, so that's the first part. Now, okay, let me check if there's more questions. There's no more questions. Okay, cool. Let me know if you're still here. I can see that some of you are here, but maybe you're shy in chat. You can have discussions amongst each other as well. Again, my question was, how do you manage this? How do you plan? How do you do sprints? Do you do safe? Do you do agile? And in some other way, do you do extreme programming? Do you do Kanban? Let me know what is relevant for you, so we can perhaps have more discussions on that. Right? So they want to know whether to kill, add, or extend, or like renegotiate terms. And in order for us to do that, we need to be able to know, well, what are we building? In what order are we building it? What is the risk involved? Right? Because the risk might be that we have a team that is building something. When they're done building it, we'll have to either build something else, or have to rebuild it, or continue building it. Right? So the definition of done usually that the stakeholders use is done means you can now work on something else. Or done might mean I am now ready to get product feedback, right? So the really silly definition of done is, oh, it's done, which means that you won't have to touch it anymore in the foreseeable future, so I can plan something else for you. Like, so this is the project mentality. This is what I have here, and then in the diagram, this is the project mentality. It's like when it's done, you can then start a new project. Now, if you're a bit more on the agile side and the product side, you might say, when we're doing market discovery, when we're discovering new revenue streams, we might do a few experiments, or maybe it's A/B testing. And then when it's done, then we get the data. And then when we get the data, then we can make the decision of whether to make that a permanent product or not. And then you move manpower off to that, and you give that team ownership about that of that project. And then you sort of bleed excess manpower back onto experiments if necessary. Right. So this is usually the growth cycle of a startup looks like this. You do experiments, and then, okay, what do we keep? What do we not keep? Investors want 10x growth in the next 7 years, or 100x growth in the next 7 years. Is that possible? Okay. Even if it's a success, it might be a too small success. So, agile. You're doing agile. Could you expand on that? What it means for you to be doing agile? I know that I don't wanna, give the impression that this might be dogmatic in some way. I would just like to know your cadence to the person in chat who said that you're doing agile. I'd like to know. That's Dennis, right? I would like to know in detail, like, what that means for you exactly. What does that mean for you to be doing agile? How does it affect you? Why are you doing it? Because we will now start the second section of our stream, which is about data. Just to recap, we're doing plans to manage risk. The risk comes from the decisions that the stakeholders can do being dangerous or even harmful if done late. Right? So that's the main thing we manage. We want to make sure that if there's a pseudo do this instead decision, that it happens at the beginning of the project. Right? So if the project needs to be killed because it doesn't go anywhere, it should happen at the beginning of the project. If there needs to be more manpower to be added to the project, it should happen at the beginning of the project. If there's more negotiation to be done on terms, on complexity, on scope, it should happen at the beginning of the project. At the beginning of the project, meaning at the earliest possible convenience, not at the end of the deadline. Right? So the worst thing you can do in a project, and this is, I think, most of naively managed, best effort but naive type of tech leadership, tech management, engineering management approaches, is to say, we will do our best, and then at the end of the deadline, we will course correct. Like, that is the worst way of running a project, because then it's, you spend all your budget, you spend all your time, and then you do a retro. Well, now it's too late. Now you have no more money to act on it. You're just assuming that if you make a mistake, whoever is involved, the stakeholder or the client or the customer, will want to buy another round with you so that you can improve on the next round. No. If you have an X amount of budget, you need to do improvements within that budget. Otherwise, you're wasting the time. Otherwise, you're playing a very risky game. Right? So the risk is always, if we don't course correct, if we don't improve, if we don't do these kinds of decisions on a top level very, very quickly, very early, there's the risk that we will force them to make a decision they don't want to, so they will kill the product. They will kill the project instead, or have angry meetings, or somebody gets fired, or pipped, or whatever. Right? So that's the risk part. Now that is the planned risk. Then there is also the accidental risk, and that we're talking about now. So topic number 2 is using data. Now, one data point that we can use is event modeling, right? So if I'm, where's the bloody plug? It's here. Just want to look at the cheat sheet real quick. All right, so one data point that we can use is something like this. You say, this is our app, this is an event model, this is the flow of data, this is the flow of information. When a blue, orange, and a green box touch, that's usually work for one person or one pair of people, of engineers, for possibly a day or less. Adam Dimitruk stands by his definition of these slices of somebody well versed in this kind of work, who's also senior developer, will probably take 1 day for a slice. And then the slices of predictable complexity. It's usually some CRUD operation or some synchronization effort. I do recommend Yves Go11's website on this. Architectural patterns. There are basically 9 different combinations of event slices, and you can build all systems using these just 9 patterns. It's Yves Go11. Go11, what a great surname. So this topic is about primarily where does the data come from, right? Because generally, early on in my career, and please tell me if this is your experience as well. Early on in my career, people have constantly told me that the best way, that the most Asher, hello. Edgar, hello. Okay, so it was Asher. Okay, Asher, you said you're doing agile. Dennis, hello. I did miss some comments, and this is normal by now. So let me know if this is your experience as well. But when I started off in the industry, I was told that the most important meetings that I'm having is when stakeholders, managers, leaders come in and they say, Dennis, we need to estimate this project. This is what needs to be done. Here's the project in a high degree of detail. When do you think this can be finished or delivered by? I was told that was one of my most important responsibilities as a junior, medium level sort of engineer, very early on in my career. And I took that seriously. But I was started reading. I've been quite a strong follower of the hashtag no estimates movement for quite some time now. And recently I started reading Vasco Duarte's work about guessing and the whole hashtag no estimates movement. Because what a lot of people think is that hashtag no estimates means that there just won't be estimates. It'll be done when it's done. But that's actually not the case. What no estimates means is that we set deadlines that we keep because we use data. Right, so hashtag no estimates, the movement says, I will give you a projection for when the project will be done without guessing. So I will only give you I'm not estimating, because estimating means I'm guessing, I'm speculating. So I will only give you projections based on data that I do have. If I don't have data, I won't give you anything, or I will give you speculative data, but I will just give you the data and you can decide what to do. That is the idea behind this, because the biggest fallacy that I see a lot of technical and also, for the most part, non-technical product owners, product planners, product managers, CPOs, VPs of product do is they think, oh, our projects are always late, so what we should be doing is getting better at estimation. But for the past 40 years in our industry, as much as we try, as we have millions, hundreds of millions of the engineers in the past 40 years, nobody's getting better at estimation. There's extensive research. 40 to 60% of all projects are late. All kinds of projects. Now, the agile projects are more on the 40% side. Everything else is on the 60% side. That's because everybody's guessing. It's like, hey, can you estimate this? Like, yeah, sure. I can guess. I can always guess. But it'll definitely be wrong. It'll definitely be not factual in, not be grounded in reality. So that's how the whole hashtag no estimates movement kicked off, which started from lean and extreme programming. Extreme programming has principles that oppose this. Lean has more statistics-based methodologies that oppose this. So how do you use data? Now, I can give you a really good example on this because a lot of people don't believe me. And I recommend you check out I recommend you check out Alan Holub's video on no estimates, and he actually recommended Vasco Duarte's work at his book on his conference talk. So you can Google it real quick. I don't want to bore you with, like, we tried watching YouTube videos on stream. It's not fun for anybody. So I will just give you a quick example of a Jira burn down chart. I'm not gonna bore you with the details. I'm just gonna take the first image off of Google Images and we look at it, okay? Now, this is a burn down chart. And a lot of people tell me, Dennis, I can't have this chart until my team estimates all the stories, all the tickets, all the work. It's a high level of detail, and they have said how many hours, or if it's stories, how many hours is one story point. That's the worst thing. That's the worst mistake. You start relative sizing, and then somebody says, okay, but can you convert it to hours now? Because there's this huge misconception between cycle time and lead time. Cycle time is, I might tell you this takes 6 hours of work, but I didn't tell you how I'm going to invest those 6 hours. Because maybe I only work 1 hour during the week and 2 hours during Fridays. Which means that if we start on Thursday, it'll take me until Wednesday to invest 6 hours into your project. Now, this calendar thing, that's lead time. When developers estimate, not only are they guessing and speculating, but they're also guessing and speculating cycle time when the stakeholder expects lead time. So they will tell you, oh yeah, this takes 6 hours. Oh, 6 hours. Yeah, so if you start now, you're done by dinner. It's like, no, maybe next Wednesday. It's like, what do you mean? Didn't you say just 6 hours? I can't just add these together and it will make sense on my calendar. It's like, of course not. Of course not. Right? It's obvious to us, but it creates all of these like weird setups of confidence, and there's this issue of, is this process trustworthy? Why are we estimating? Why are the estimations always wrong? How can we get better at estimations? And Vasco Duarte really nails it in the process part. He says, either you trust your process fully or you need to change it. And if you're estimating and your process isn't touching reality, you got to change it. There is no improving the process. You got to change the process, right? So there is no, oh yeah, let's get better at estimates. No, just stop estimating and do something else. Stop guessing. Now, number one, how can you get data in here? This is Jira. So in Jira, there's this drop down at the top left of this chart. And the first thing I recommend you do is you select this drop down and you say, instead of story points, give me just the number of tickets. Now, the chart on the vertical will change. You will go from story points to number of tickets, but the shape of the chart won't change. See, because unless you're some weird psychopath that has tickets for, I'm opening my browser, I'm closing my browser, I'm opening my IDE, I'm sending you an email. Unless you have tickets for all of this, humans in your team who write tickets generally have a feeling of, okay, no, that's silly. That's too small. Like I can't tell you breathe out, inhale, exhale. No, it's like the ticket is usually, hey, could you take a look at this? Could you implement this part of the feature, please? Could you have a conversation here? Could you export this? The tickets are already sized because the tickets are asking somebody to do something or instructing an improvement or an increment to the system. So they're never as large as please cure world hunger. Find a cure for cancer. And they're never as small as open your browser, close your browser, double click on emails, triple click on emails, single click on emails, send emails, receive emails. That's an IT crowd reference, by the way, for those of you who are enthusiasts. Which means your team generally will have a natural cadence for how large your tickets can be. And even the few tickets that are outliers, the outliers are also statistically consistent. This is very much predictable in any team that isn't, being disbanded every week, unless there's a psychopath on the team who just, games this system. That I've met a few, but it's very rare. It's very rare. Safe to assume that if you go from story points to the count of tickets, when you pull this line, so this line from here to the bottom, even though the numbers will change on the vertical, the shape of the line and on which date it crosses onto 0 won't. Try this. You don't have to believe me, just believe your data. If you're using Jira or Linear B or something similar, it will have this option. So first of all, change your story point scale to ticket count. Now, first thing you'll notice is that once you do that, if the only reason you did story point estimation is to be able to plan the sprint, once you change the tickets, there's suddenly no more need to estimate. And that's number one, because now we're using data. Because what we really want to know is, what does a team generally call a ticket that is ingrained into the culture of the team or the company even? Okay, how many tickets does a team do in a week? And if you want to be on time, if you want to finish before the deadline, you need to be on time every day. That means that on time every day means that you're below this gray line. This is a burn down chart. Now, I'm not going to bore you with velocity. I'm not a Scrum, Agile coach, whatever. I'm just a coach. I'm just a coach who's also a fellow technologist. I don't care about velocity. As far as I'm concerned, velocity is looking at the wrong thing. What I care about is how many tickets the team can finish in a foreseeable future. Now, if you call that velocity, no problem. If you know you have 10 tickets to do this week, and you do 2 every day, and this week has 5 days, and it's Tuesday, and you want to finish on Friday, well, then that's not happening, because you're 2 tickets short, right? So that's this case on the chart, right? So this is a shape of a chart. I don't know what this project is about. This is a shape of a chart where the project is behind. Now, what happened here is that somehow they managed to pull it off. Somehow, the very last day, they gave it away. Sorry. Sorry. The very last day, they somehow made it work. So I would say somebody course corrected, removed some tickets, and then they managed to pull it off by the end of the sprint. Now, usually what happens, this is not an ideal case, usually what happens is there's also a few bumps where this line goes up, where the scope changes. So realistically speaking, a more valid project would be something closer to this, right? And this is much closer to what I see often. Now, the flat lines mean that the team is either has no idea what to do, and they're spending time in meetings, or they're on support, or they're doing some maintenance stuff that's not in the board, or they're wasting a lot of time estimating tickets whenever there's a flat line. And you can see this project has made it, I don't know, 40% till the deadline. This is a 2-week sprint, and then they cancel the sprint. This is not very good, by the way. Plus, there were some disruptions, but the project was already so far off course that this team, nobody likes working in such a team because you're just constantly late. Again, I don't know what this team is about. I'm just reading the data. And the point is, this data is very reliable. Again, this drop down here, you click this drop down and you change it to ticket count. The vertical part of the chart will change, but the shape of the chart won't. And what you want is the shape of the chart, right? So if you just skip this process, you don't need to estimate anything. Now, the estimations that are being done, the data points, when we are estimating, what we're really estimating is, do we all agree on how complex this is? Or Because if it's not, we have no effing clue, or if it's just too freaking big on the scale, what will happen is that one ticket, once we start working on it, the developer will then split it up into 10 tickets. So that will be an unexpected scope increase in the middle of the. So it'll be like just like this giant bump in the middle of the sprint, when the developer who starts working on it suddenly decides that this is 10 tickets, right? That's why you do estimation at the beginning of the project, so you figure out, okay, which ticket is going to explode into 10 tickets. That's why relative estimation is being done, and this should be a benign process. You have 10 tickets, you look at them, okay, is any of them going to be exploding? Yes, that one. Okay, let's split it apart. This should be an activity that lasts 10-15 minutes. No, please, no 3-hour sprint plannings. Like, that's a huge waste of time. And no sprint plannings where you're actually estimating the absolute story points of each ticket, because we already know that ticket count is enough, unless you have a psychopath in your team, which you probably don't. Well, statistically speaking, you probably don't. So that's one way of using the data. Now, another way of using the data is you can go into a very detailed event model. Just let me find it real quick. Sadly, I can't use. I do have event models that are nice and real, but NDAs are what they are. Unfortunately, I can't show you. Maybe at some point. So this is an example NDA. Sorry, this is an example event model from eventmodeling.org, from the research section. And generally, the idea behind it is, at least the way I tried, and Adam Dimitruk has the most experience here, so you can ask him on the Discord channel for event modeling, which is also on this website. What you can do here is you can start with this instead. So you can do an event storming / modeling process with your business stakeholders without any technical details. So that you just keep this to a business, and you just have a conversation of, okay, does a human do this? Does a machine do this? Do we have the machine, or do we need to build it? Okay, we need to build it. Okay, so we build this story. Okay, what is the user doing here now? Okay, so the user is doing something here. This is something coming from the user's device. This is something that is an external provider. Here we have, I see the wireframe is going here, and then it's going that way. So this is manual. Here, whenever there's two UI elements touching like this, and there's a gap, that means that the user is connecting the dots, not the machine. That's something new I learned recently, is that when there's a gap on the event model, it's because the user is doing a manual process up above on the UI. Right? So that's also useful to model and to actually write stories about that. The point here is that if you see this, you can draw lines, like these cycles belong together, and you can draw lines here to create vertical slices of each of these data transition. And you can do two things with that. First of all, each slice is probably equivalent of what you would call one story or one ticket, right? Because I can express it. Oh, when the user registers, this happens. That might be a ticket. Oh, when I add a room, and it affects availability this way, that way. When I book a room, it affects availability, but it also has a side effect on the cleaning schedule. No, right? So all these things can be tickets. So what you can do is, rather than having this second, third line derivative of having a spec and an ADR and a bunch of Jira tickets, you can just start with this instead. Start with a document of business requirements, then have a conversation about the business requirements, role play the entire story with your business stakeholders of what can be possible inside the system, especially on the branching paths. Okay, here the user can do this, and here the user can, or that. So you also want to draw the stories for different branches that a story can take, because it's not linear. Some apps can be used. Some apps, like especially multi-vector marketplaces, can be used in different ways, in different orders. And sometimes there's synchronization needed. Here, the advertiser buys something, and the publisher makes something available. So it requires the synchronization of two different kinds of humans for the flow to continue, for example, right? And that's two different branches throughout the system that might need to coexist in sync somehow, and it doesn't make sense to deploy them independently. But I digress. What you can do with an event model like this is you can just say, these are all tickets. So combining that knowledge with this knowledge, I can say, well, if they're all just tickets, I can just count how many there are. Just following the data streams, the mutations across the data, I can just count how many there are. Like then I can check how many the team on average does generally. Then I can say, oh yeah, the team does 5 on average per week. There's 14 of them here. I didn't count them, I'm just making up a number. There's 14 of them here. So it's safe to say that it's going to take 3 weeks just to establish work, and however long it takes to deploy and synchronize everything, plus meetings. Now, how long it takes to deploy once it's done, that's DORA metrics. So if you have those as well, you can combine these two informations and just have a completely data-driven roadmap. This is how much functionality there is. This is the likelihood of how many surprises we get in a week, right? But that's also accounted. That's already accounted for in how much stuff do we get done in a week, how many tickets. Because if there's interruptions, then that number is lower on average. And then you just follow that path. And then if somebody says, yeah, that's not fast enough, how can we do it 1 month earlier? Then you have that discussion from earlier. Like, well, you add manpower, you cut one of these vertical slices. Or maybe you want to go to market so fast that we need to start on the right side here, or on this side here on checkout and pay, because this is analytics and this is administration. So maybe we should only start with the user side and call this version 1, and then this is version 2, and then this is version 3. And we will start with this one and fake everything else around it. And that we can do in a third of the time. And we start with that. We go to market with that first. And then if there's traction, well, we create demand with this prototype. Then we iron out the kinks for our back-end office to make our CFO and accountants happy. And then we figure out how to go from there and probably build a new roadmap. And that is a completely data-driven decision if you want it to be. Or if you don't have the confidence to sit down with the data, the only option you're left with is sitting down in a meeting room with all the accountable people, and you try to guess. Now, sadly, most engineers that I know, have never had the good fortune of working in a well-functioning team, and that is exactly what they do most often. They just sit down and they try to guess. What do you think, when will this be done? Well, this is a complex feature. This is a not so complex feature. Oh, I think this thing has to be done with that framework. I don't know. If you don't know the framework, how do you know it has to be done with that? And then you have these weird rabbit hole conversations. And that's topic number 3 for today. These kinds of meetings. Because sometimes the data tells you we are super slow. This is not happening on budget. This is not happening in the timeline that you want, the stakeholder. But we're ashamed to admit that, so we will guess. And if you push, we will slowly align it to your number. And that's a lie, but at least you'll go away, and then we'll be late, and then we'll have this conversation again. But you keep paying our salaries for some reason, so apparently this process works. And this is the apathy route. And sadly, a lot of engineers work like this. We have a few questions, so I just want to take a quick interruption on this. Can you please mention one more time what is the name of this mapping approach? Okay, I'm very sorry. I was too late to read your comment, so I need to go a little bit back now. So so this is event modeling. If I'm connecting the dots correctly here. So the model I had on the screen is event modeling. You can check it out on eventmodeling.org. Luke, thank you. Luke G linked it in chat. The idea here is that you decompose your application by following the path of how the data mutations happen. Because usually data mutations capture important pieces of UI that the user cares about, or important automation that needs to be in place. And usually those are the most complex. Like the duration or the cost of your project is proportional to the feature complexity and the accidental complexity, right? So maybe you're using a clumsy framework, that's accidental complexity. Maybe you have a really bad communication structure with your employees, that's accidental complexity. Maybe your feature is very complex because it touches and synchronizes a lot of data points. That is the complexity of the feature itself, right? So the general absolute terms, the number of days it takes on the calendar is a combination of these two metrics, is sort of a multiplied effort of these two numbers. It usually has nothing to do with how many lines of code, because usually if I tell it to, I do a lot of katas with I don't do a lot of katas. We ensemble program a lot on actual real problems, and some engineers do it in 5 lines of code, and some engineers do it in 40 lines of code. And usually the engineers who do it in 40 lines of code are done faster than the person who does it in 5 lines of code, because the person who does it in 5 lines of code thinks a lot, and it's very hard to decompose. It's like they're building something that's like a Swiss watch. It's like very miniature, it's very precise, it's like clockwork, and if there's something wrong, you need to take it apart, isolate it, fix it, and then put it back together and compress it. Right? So trying to come up with the simplest solution first is actually much more work than just writing a lot of lines of code and just exploring the problem and then deleting most of it. That's usually where you go with TDD, and that's also the main criticism of TDD, and whether that's warranted or not is a topic for another day. So the planning approach, this decomposition, this is event modeling. I had a podcast with a 3-hour podcast on that with Adam Dimitruk. So if you want to check it out in detail, it's on this YouTube channel on @Technologies Podcast. But there's also a very vibrant community of, I think, over 1,000 community members. You can check it out. There's also a few, probably in chat, a few event modeling enthusiasts in chat. Let yourself be known, and you can network and you can ask them some questions, and we can maybe set up a event modeling workshop at some point and take it from there. Okay, so that's the first question. Thank you. That I missed. Second one that's Thomas, right? Hello, Thomas. Good to see you. The thing on tickets is on the day you touch the ticket and find out that it's too big and cut it in more tickets, what happens with your deadline? Will it move? What should you do? Is it time to rethink about the project at that time? Yes. So that's the solution to which relative sizing comes in. Now the problem is, the devil is in the details, right? So the devil is in this part of, you find out that it's too big and cut it into more tickets. Now, there's no guarantee that when you cut it into more tickets, that if somebody else, not you, is working on those tickets that you've cut up, it's possible that they will cut up one of the small ones as well. Right? So once you start doing this, there's no guarantee that this process is actually finite. So my recommendation would be, when you encounter such a ticket, if it's not critical, it should be removed immediately, right? Because a ticket that has these properties is not actionable, which means that what does this is a very good question, because it touches on an important topic about agile. Agile doesn't maximize speed, velocity. You're not running with your computer. It's not like you're on your standing desk and you're holding your laptop and everybody's running. That's not what Agile is about. Agile is about increasing and specifically shortening the time it takes to get feedback. That doesn't mean that we're done sooner. It just means that if it's a large task, we will interrupt ourselves while we're developing it in such a way, ideally, that every time we interrupt ourselves, this thing we have, once the interruption kicks in, is a finished piece. That's the point. So think of it like having, in sports, a soccer match, it has 2 half times. Right? So the point is, we have a half time in the life cycle of this ticket, or maybe it's split into tenths. So there's the first tenth, then there's a second tenth, then there's a third tenth, right? So we have tenths all over this one ticket, and we call each of those slices maybe one ticket, and this is actually an epic, or this is the sprint itself is the whole, and then you have 10 of something. So the whole point of breaking work up is to say, I will consciously interrupt myself every day so I can give feedback. Now, the feedback that I want to give is is actually this. This is the feedback that you want to give, right? This. Every day, you need to interrupt yourself to say, okay, did I make the line move today? If I didn't make the line move, as in down, if I didn't make the line move down, means that we are above the gray line. If we are above the gray line, and this is a 2-week sprint, and we're 1 day in, then today I know that we're not on time. And if we're not on time on day 1, that means that it's very likely that we're off by at least 2 days. But depending on the level of confidence in the team, you might be off by an entire order of magnitude. Right? So the problem is on day 1, you realize that you're a bit late, and you assume that the project is only going to be 1 day late. But if everybody's late to the exact same degree as you are, that means that the project will be off by 2x. Because if the plan was that you do 1 ticket every day, and for the first ticket you needed 2 days, well, that's a 2x difference. If everybody's working like that, then the 2-week thing is off by 2 weeks. That's where the problems start. And the thing is, just by looking at the data, I can tell you, yeah, you're no longer on time. At least that's what the data indicates. Now, the data has bias. And the more you know that I'm looking at this, the more this data can be gained. But this has the benefit of being, and again, please click the drop down, go to story count, go to ticket count, not story points. I don't care about story points. If you're using story points, just make them 1, please. Then we have the same, then we're looking at the same thing, right? Because that's the whole point. The point about relative ticket estimation is that only ones should make it into the sprint. Everything that's more than a 1 should be split up into an equivalent number of 1s. That's the whole point of relative estimation. It was never meant to be used as a currency to be put on the ticket. Like a ticket is not supposed to have a 3. If a ticket is estimated to be a 3 in relative sizing, in like t-shirt sizing, that means that it should not be worked on because it's too large. Because it does not match the ideal frequency of feedback. Because 3 means that the delay on feedback is 3 times larger than what we would ideally want. So if we're late, we're gonna find out 3 times later. So ideally, if we check every day, then maybe on day 3 we realize that we're one day behind. That's fine. But if you have 3s in your story and your ideal frequency is 1 day, then once you're late, you'll learn that you're late with a 3-day delay. But now in the 3-day delay, if you have a lot of people working, you might be late anywhere between 3 and the entire day, the entire team times 3 amount of time, right? So if your latency of information of how often do you check whether you're late or not is very large, then it's possible that within 3 days you accrue an entire sprint length's worth of delay without knowing about it. Now, the point of the dailies is to actually communicate this, but I've seen nobody use dailies like this. And even when I see agile coaches be on the team, they often don't address this because they're not focusing on the real problem. The real problem is that there was already waste done with some fake confidence, with story point estimations and detail, and the tickets are not in the right form, that the team has lost the track. The track being, does everybody agree with what the priorities are? And if yes, is everybody stopping work at the end of the day or every few hours to give feedback and to ask for feedback? That's the point. If you're not doing that, the team needs to agree that this is a problem. Otherwise, they won't address it. And that's the whole point about agile and agile digital transformations. It's just this. You want data? I want the data to change every day. That's the best way of running a project, because then you can start a project, and then at day 1, your red line is flat. There's no data. But on day 2, you already know whether you're on time. Because if because it's really easy, right? The math is really easy. If there's with the law of averages, if you want to meet the deadline, you need to be on time every day. So there's an ideal cycle to how you want to run your project, right? So to answer Thomas's question, will it move? What should you do? Is it time to rethink about the project at that time? Yes. Because if you split the ticket up and you're counting tickets, then you have this boink in the middle of the sprint, and now you are at the critical point where now you know less about the project than 2 days earlier when you planned it. That's a very bad way of starting a project. Now you know that you know less, but that means that any kind of promises that you made 2 days ago are now you know that they were false. They were not correct. You didn't have the data. Now you have data, so now you can make a better promise. And then you just keep doing this. You could keep drilling down on this effort of just splitting work up until it makes sense, which is essentially what event modeling does, right? Like event modeling splits it up into the atomic pieces to the point where it cannot be split up. That's why Adam Dimitruk goes about this idea of just start with the event model, because then at least the atomic slice can't be split up into less pieces. Because you can't get simpler than input comes in, do something with it, output goes out. Like generally, you can only go into further detail if you need some assembly level optimizations, or if you properly need CPU cache usage optimization with some algorithmic stuff, then yes. But for most of us in small, medium businesses, startups, SMBs, enterprises with web applications, this will never be necessary. So just for the confidence, if you start with an event model, at least you know that ticket that you reverse engineered from a vertical slice, at least that cannot be split up into smaller pieces, unless you misunderstood how the application works, in which case that is a very important product information. Because the plan will tell you two things. Do you understand the product? And do you understand what is the right quality and time to invest right now? Those are the two things that, are we building the right thing, and are we building it the right way? I'm going to repeat that just for while I refresh comments. So are you building the right thing, and are you building it the right way, right? So it's the feature complexity and the accidental complexity. This is 90% of what you need to get right when you're setting deadlines for a product. Now, I said that today was about product planning. So there's also that question of, like, we need to talk about something really annoying, in that some Dean, hello. Safe is not agile, it's fragile. I changed my mind. It's a great comment. So the idea, I'm just gonna, sorry, I don't want Jira to be on my, yeah, there we go. Whoa. Hello? Yes. Focus on me. Yes. Thank you. Forehead. Oh my God. Hang on, guys. Yes, we're good. Autofocus, please. No. Okay. No, that's actually my camera doing something weird. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. So on the product side, you will often encounter product people who will say, okay, we're confident this works, just build this, please. So they are also estimating. They are also guessing. They are also speculating about whether a feature is valuable or not, whether they know a feature to predict whether a feature will have market value. Now, the reason they're doing that is actually coming from a good place, because they are trying to estimate, if we're building the right thing, we need to really push through, because the user at this point doesn't know what they want, because they didn't see what we can do, because they have no reference point for it, right? So this is that approach of, we need to build something first to create demand. And then once we have created demand, those people that have responded to the demand, those we can then interview to make improvements to the product, right? So this is, to share the Excalibur draw from the beginning again, because my camera is acting up. I'm very sorry. Production. Right, so if you're running an experiment, it's very likely that you will need to run an experiment, and one of the departments that benefits the most from the experiment will be the marketing and sales department, because you will be delivering an artifact they can use to create demand on the market. They can show screenshots, they can show a bare bone version of the product, where a walking skeleton of the product, where they can just show it, have UIs, use it in sales meetings, use it in VC funding rounds, use it as just a working or at least walking prototype, because you might want to score funding, or because you might want to build a big followership and beta testers and a list of early adopters who you can then survey and talk to while you're building the product. Now, some enterprises don't work like this. Enterprises generally have a solid product, so they are more on the right, the blue side of this concept, and they don't know what experiments to run that would be more worthwhile than what they already have in their existing revenue stream. So generally, they are about risk minimalization, not so much about taking risks to build a new revenue stream. But of course, your mileage might vary. I can't speculate on this because the devil's in the details, and we'd actually need to have a specific example with some specific details. But the reason I mention this is because the flow of confidence, let's say, the flow of confidence throughout a project is to do with what we can guarantee. Giving estimates to somebody doesn't make you more confident, doesn't make them more confident. In fact, if you give estimates, as in you guess, you don't use the data, you guess at the beginning of the project, and in the same way that Thomas asked this question, the first day you get data, if you see that the data don't think that the first day of data is noise. Just act on it. Just assume it's correct and act on it. Because if you're doing a really good job, even if it's noisy, the data will tell you that yes, you're on time, but plus minus this much. But if the data tells you that day one you're already late, day two you're already late, yeah, we'll fix that. Like this is just the beginning of the project while we're doing setup. No, take it seriously. A lot of engineers, a lot of managers discount this early data because everybody mistakes it for noise. But this is really powerful. So when you estimate a project at the beginning and you ignore the first few days worth of data, your confidence actually goes down. See, a lot of engineers that I coach, they report being stressed on estimation meetings because it lowers their confidence, right? And senior management sees that. And then they're like, well, why are you so nervous? Why? Like, you just gave me an estimate. Is the estimate wrong? Everybody knows it's wrong. Stakeholders know the estimates are wrong. I had a workshop with stakeholders last week. I asked them, hey, how often are the engineering department's estimates correct? And everybody laughed. They know they're wrong. Everybody in the industry knows that the estimates are wrong, but still, we use them. We use them because we're naive. We use them because we don't have confidence and we think that this process of estimation is necessary. It's not. When you're planning a product, question yourself, what do the estimates allow me to do? And usually what the estimates allow you to do is just this. I can make these three decisions with the estimates. The estimation definitely doesn't make the project go faster. But the estimation conversation, if it's about relative sizing, might expose the risks that Thomas mentions here. It's like, oh yeah, maybe we'll find one of those tickets, and that's actually a ticking time bomb, and it's actually much more complex. That you should be talking about, and then reprioritize what happens. It's like, okay, that one we split up into 10 smaller ones. Cut it up into 10 smaller ones. Does that mean that all 10 of them are a chunk, or do we need 2 out of those 10 to be high prior and 8 out of those 10 to be low prior? That's the conversation you want to have. because your team still has the same data. Yeah, we do X amount of tickets every week. Okay, now you just added 2, so you need to take two away. Maybe 3 if you spend a lot of time on this meeting. That's the whole point, right? The risk is, well, we can do, with this amount of meetings, we can do 5 tickets per week, let's say. But if we escalate the sprint every week, or if you just escalate, if you don't use sprints, I'm not advocating sprints. I'm not saying you need to use sprints. But if you're escalating all the time, escalate, not going according to plan, emergency, urgent, then all of those meetings for all of those emergencies are making your average amount of stuff you get done in a week go down. Right? So for a lot of teams, just having the confidence of, no, we'll just act on it. We'll just assume it's wrong. We'll just act on it immediately without having a meeting. We'll just cut something out, change the plan, and then you get informed in 3 days rather than 2 weeks. Because the best outcome is if you have a 2-week plan, if it's not going according to plan in 3 days, just cancel it in 3 days and then have a meeting and then decide, okay, it's not going according to plan. Do you want to wait until the end of the 2 weeks, or do you want to do something about it now? And most often the stakeholders will say, yeah, let's do something about it right now. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. If we were on time, this and this and this would already be done. It's not. So we're probably off by at least 40%. So cut this much and then some to help us finish early. Otherwise, we'll finish when we're done with this, and then hopefully that will be at the halfway point of the budget, and then we can decide what to do with the rest. Because that is the best possible outcome. Because at that point, everybody's guessing, and not only is everybody's guessing, but if the project is not going according to plan, everybody's guessing, and you have evidence that this team is not very good at guessing. But everybody's not good at guessing. It's just you didn't have evidence of the team not being good at guessing. But we already knew that they were not likely to be good at guessing. But now when you have the evidence, please, for the love of God, use the data. If the team is late, don't ask them, well, when do you think it's going to be done? Because they already got it wrong, so stop asking. This is for you stakeholders out there, because I know you like doing this. It's like, oh, you were wrong. Okay, so now when do you think it's going to be done? No, just stop asking them. Just look at the data. You can look at the data without having a conversation with them. The data is enough. And most people I know use Jira, but then don't look at the data that they have. And they have conversations where they say, okay, so you were wrong about the estimate, which means the size is wrong. And we have invested a week and we didn't make progress. Nothing is deployed. So how far along do you think we are? Right? So now the estimate of the size of the thing is wrong. And now you ask them to estimate how far along are we? So what percentage of the ticket that's wrong did we do? Because then what will that tell you? Like when it will be actually finished? Like all of these data points are off by that point. And this is the biggest waste. This is topic number 3 for today. It's like these kinds of conversations. Please catch yourself having these kinds of conversations. This is the biggest waste. Because it doesn't generate value. It doesn't generate certainty. It doesn't guarantee anything. And what is worst, these kinds of conversations undermine the confidence of the team, and they undermine the trust that the stakeholders have in the engineering department. And that is the worst kind of apathy, right? Where you say, yeah, you guys are always wrong. Just give me give me your number. I'll adjust it with my spreadsheet and we call it quits. That's the worst kind, because that then eliminates human interaction. That then eliminates this. Yeah, I might get it wrong, but this is my process. I use the data, and maybe there's something wrong with how I use the data, or maybe there's an anomaly this week that I don't understand. But then that's what we're talking about. But if you're just guessing and there's no data and it's just gut feel, and you're always building something new, because you're not building commodity software. You're building something new that you never built before. That's why you're in business. So you're always building something new. You're never building something twice, unless you're remediating some technical debt. But then whatever you're rebuilding is so complex that you actually might get it wrong because it's so complex. Because the accidental complexity outweighs the feature complexity, and the feature complexity is also very high. Okay, a few more rounds of comments. Matthias, hello. Very lovely to see our YouTube audience also be very active on these calls. We are sort of in like 75 minutes into the call. If you have a few more questions, I would open the floor for a little bit of back and forth with our participants. Retreat crew. I know there's 6 of you on one device, but if you want to shoot me DM me some questions or post some questions, I would love to start that conversation. I don't know why this is happening. Is it me? Is it the camera? No, it's just focusing permanently on hello, darkness, my friend. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna be out of focus. I'm very sorry about production today. So the big part about planning, to recap, is you have control over the product. Actually, I need to show you something because I just feel silly. At least I'll zoom out. Sorry. Okay. So this is the agenda for today. So you want to have a plan to mitigate the risk of knowing when are those hard decisions still useful. Hard decisions being kill the project, add manpower, renegotiate terms. Scope can always be renegotiated, but it's the terms of the project that you want to renegotiate. Does this impact something? Is something else waiting? Does definition of done here impact us not starting some other project in the next quarter? Right? So you want to understand what the terms are surrounding the project. Scope can always be negotiated. I've never seen a project where scope couldn't be negotiated. So the risk of not having a plan is that you don't know what the timeline is. Oh, I think focus fixed itself. Yes. So the risk of not having a plan is that you don't know what the timeline is. So you don't know when it's too late to make those decisions, adding manpower, killing the project, renegotiating terms. That's number one. Number two is if you're creating that timeline and you're guessing, you might be more inclined to not use the data that you already have because the data might be incompatible with your guess. Right? So if you're guessing, I would always encourage you to at least use the data you have and then guesstimate using the data you have. Right? So anything where a human goes and says, I think this ticket is a 5, that is very likely wasted effort. Because it should just be a 1. Right? So my suggestion here would be simplify the process so that the decision that is being done on estimations is binary, which is this ticket a 1? As in, would you like to split this up into further detail? If yes, then it's not actionable. Then we can't tackle it because we don't know whether it will follow our ideal desired frequency of feedback. And frequency of feedback can be anything. Can it be merged in a day? Can it be tested in a day? Can it be written in a day? Can it be deployed in a day? Right? So all of these impact frequency of feedback. Because if you're building a 5, that might take 2 weeks. And a 1 might take 4 hours. But then whatever you build in those 2 weeks will be harder to deploy, harder to merge, harder to test cover, harder to code review, harder to course correct if it's wrong, harder to bug fix. Right? So when you're outside of the ideal frequency of feedback, right? So this is the antithesis of trunk-based development. So you're not doing continuous integration, you're not deploying, you're not ready all the time. You're just isolating yourself on a large ticket without splitting it up, which nobody can help you. Nobody knows when you'll be done. Nobody knows where the bottlenecks are. Nobody knows what the problem is. They just know that at the end of the time, at the end of the deadline, at the end of the budget, you said, I have 0. And then you estimate, yeah, I think it's 80% done. And then your original estimate was done, and then you're estimating progress, and then you're just guessing upon guessing upon guessing upon guessing. So my ask to you is when you're planning a product, make the first guess. You will want to guess. Somebody at some point will be guessing. Just make sure that that is not the first data point. For the first decision, always use data, please. And you always have data. If nothing else, start the sprint, and day 2 on the sprint, you will have data. And then make the decision. I see this with a lot of evolving agile teams. So teams that think they are agile, but they're not really, but they are trying, they are improving. What happens is they start the sprint. It's actually one of the teams I'm working with right now as well. They have this kind of behavioral element to course correcting, where they plan the sprint, and then 2 days in, when they start working on it, they learn so much that they immediately replan the sprint. So they have this weird fuzzy thing going on at the beginning of the sprint. So they plan it, they start working on it, and then they replan the critical bits of it. And usually they just cut off the tail end of it. And that's really healthy. Now that's healthy in a way that it is headed the right direction. It is not ideal, but it is a sign of improvement. Because of course, the alternative is then that other thing that I suggest that you avoid, which is having long meetings. So Dean had a comment. I'm sorry, Dean. I don't see your comment in the. Something broke with my. Some destinations won't get comments. Yes, thank you. Dean. So Dean commented in reply to Thomas. This is why we do backlog grooming, no? And the part is that backlog grooming should be done by the engineer, because it's the engineers that should agree on what do we usually size tickets at, because the engineers know best. The product person who creates or nurtures the backlog, they should just prioritize it and synchronize stakeholders if that's your setup. But usually, if that's not the setup, it might be one of the tech leads doing that, right? So it depends on your maturity of the team, the size of the team. Now, the issue with backlog grooming is that backlog grooming in itself is a wasteful endeavor, because ideally your backlog should be empty. There's no point grooming a backlog, because your backlog might have, the actual backlog, ticket backlog, it might have years worth of tickets. So if you don't know what will be actionable this week, then it's not worth grooming it. That again is wasted. That is speculation again, because you don't know whether it will actually be actionable this week. So what you want to do is we don't want to make it disappear. And if you try to make it disappear, and it stays because some stakeholder complains, then it's serious. Then you can split that one up, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the person who wants to add things to the backlog is not the same person as who wants to remove things from the backlog. That is why you usually need to have this product owner and tech lead dynamic going on. This person wants to add stuff. This person wants to take away stuff. And their compromise is prioritization. It's like you just give me the order and I pull. That is then checks and balances. That is a healthy relationship. Like, you prioritize, I pull. You don't push tickets. Once we pull, you don't push. You can cancel work, and then we pull the next one. Right? So it has to flow in one direction. Otherwise, you get micromanagement. And when micromanagement happens, teams might be disincentivized to split tickets up because they think that it is the responsibility of the person who is micromanaging. But they are actually too far from the problem to see that, I should have split this up, because I thought it can be done in a day and now it takes 3. So this should actually have been 3 tickets, and there's probably that are now possibly done, and there's 2 more left, but we're not building it in such a way. So because we're not getting feedback, it's actually going to take more time than necessary because we're not gathering feedback. And the older it gets, the longer it doesn't get integrated, the more mechanical problems arise from having long-lived features. Along with the well-being consequences of a developer is now isolated on some long-lived branch, and they hate their life. Hang on. Anjana, I realized that I wasn't pronouncing your name correctly. We connected on LinkedIn recently, and I checked out how to pronounce your name. I'm very sorry for mispronouncing your name the past few streams. Anjana asks, sometimes the project requires addressing some technical debt first. So is the technical debt a project by itself or part of the actual project? Is the technical debt part of the actual project? I'm going to quote Michael Feathers here, is that there are a few components that make technical debt, that make legacy code, right? It has 4 components. It's hard to understand, it's hard to change, it's not test covered, and it is extremely valuable. And it's that last bit that's really important. Because if it's not valuable, well, then it's just a waste. Then it's not debt. We can just write it off. Just go away. Like a comment, for example. A comment in a piece of code, you don't know if it's correct or not, you can safely remove. Because it is not extremely valuable. So it's not part of the technical debt. A feature that you don't understand, that you can't test cover, that is constantly being used, and is on the, if you use Adam Thornhill's, so the CEO of CodeScene, he does a lot of research on, he calls this code forensics, where he looks at the code base like a crime scene. So he will tell you, usually these kinds of features where you ask these questions are on code pieces, or today is about product planning, so let's use that terminology. They are on parts of the product, either human flows or technology in the form of written code, that is on a high frequency of change. Tax calculations, anything legal, anything documentation, anything that requires design updates or certain details and terminology to be correct at a very high frequency of change. That part of the system is very likely to have technical debt. It'll change frequently. It'll likely be hard to understand and very likely hard to change if it's not test covered well, especially if it's extremely valuable. So you said it is valuable, Anjana. So of course you're planning a part of the project. It's on the critical path. That's why it's valuable. Let's agree that critical path means it's valuable to our value stream, to our users, where we capture revenue from them, right? So we provide a value stream. This is on the critical path of that value stream. You say, if we need to manage some technical debt first, is the technical debt a project by itself or part of the actual project? Well, this is where capital efficiency comes in. And I spoke with Kent back recently, and I'm hoping I can persuade Kent to come up on one of these streams as a guest. It'd be very, very nice to have this refactoring and TBD conversation with him. Is this idea of capital efficiency, where we want to be able to focus on the idea of, I want to refactor, but I need to respect that the only reason I want to refactor is because I want to make this very important behavior change. So now I, as a developer, have to make a decision. Now, this is guesswork, but this is the important guesswork. The guesswork is it a mess, right? So if it's a mess, right, you said I have to address some technical debt first. So there's a hunch there already, some guesswork going on, that it's a mess. That means that if you don't deal with some technical debt, if you don't refactor before you add the behavior, then after you're done, you'll have a bigger mess. So what you have caused is you might have added a very important, valuable new business behavior change. But it's possible that now, as long as you keep doing this and not refactor, it's possible that there are now diminishing returns accruing in how many more times we can make this decision without being unable to act. So maybe it's okay for you, but for the next person, now they are closer to the point of no return, where this decision-making power is being taken away, right? So the decision-making power is taken away when the code says you have to address the technical debt, because you can't touch anything without breaking something. And there are such code bases where just touching anything will guarantee outage because it's so complex, accidentally complex. So that's why you do refactoring, etc. Now, what I would recommend doing is, if you know that the behavioral change will be complex and the refactoring is simple, do the refactor. because any kind of small gain on that complex change will be worth it. If the refactor is extremely complex, but the behavioral change is small, then you need to ask yourself a question. If I make this large refactor, will that small behavioral change go to market sooner? Or am I in such a messed up system that I just want to rewrite it? And that's hard. Because our gut says, yeah, let's just throw it away and let's rewrite it. And that's exactly what you shouldn't do. So you should always be skeptical of this attachment of, I no longer want to work on this code base. I just want to throw it away and restart. Because the best thing you can do is, if you have code that is valuable, extremely valuable, and you want to throw it away, the best thing you can do with such code is to refactor it. Don't rewrite it. Because this code you know is valuable. Whatever you write anew, you don't know if it's valuable. Because you might make mistakes. You might make accidental changes. Then you need to validate again if it's valuable or not. But this, at least, it's valuable. So if you just make mechanical changes to it and refactor it, you can make it even more valuable by opening up opportunities in the future to more easily make changes to it and to make it even more valuable. Right? So this is a hard question. Right? I'm glad you asked it. So the outcomes. So I can give you a little playbook here and simplify the problem down to so from worst to best. I'm sorry about the focus. I don't know what's going on today. Is it focusing on my glasses? Is that the problem? I don't know. Okay. So the worst thing you can do is the code itself is telling you no changes possible. Technical debt first. That is the worst. But that's the easiest decision to make. You just say, I'm sorry, that's touching a hotspot. Code scene says that's a hotspot. Original author is no longer with the company. Most maintainers have not touched this code in the last 3 months. It has a high frequency of change, but the people who change it often are no longer with the company. It's not test covered, it's hard to read. It has a lot of code smells and bumpy road. You have a tool like CodeScene or Codana, it will give you this report and it will tell you immediately at the beginning of when you do the product planning, I will have to do this change in that hotspot. So you can already say, this probably needs to be split up. I need to prepare some abstractions, some fundamentals, and then I'll add the feature. That's how I would address that. Number 2, you're not forced to make it, so you need to make a decision. Here, I would give you that previous framework. Is the behavioral change large and the refactoring small or medium? Cool, do the refactoring first. Because whatever you do, this is so complicated that it will benefit from whatever little refactoring you do, because you just don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be. If the behavior is very small and the refactoring is very large, add the behavior and then see if the refactoring still makes sense, or if there's something more important that you need to be working on. And then there's a third option. Then there's one, the best option is refactor on the downtime on the critical path code while the sprint is still being groomed and planned. So ideally you finish the sprint early, so use your time that you have left because you've done everything well in the sprint to refactor things on the critical path, especially those that you change frequently and have touched in this cycle. So just preemptively refactor things that you know are coming down the line because somebody is actually architecting for the future and planning for the future. So it is valuable, but some workaround needs to be killed. Refactor is small. Yeah, so if it's a small refactor, I would say do the refactor first. If it's such a refactor that it is, takes a day, just add that to the plan. Right? Maybe the plan is that you don't know how to express the refactoring in business terms. So my recommendation would be learn how to say, oh, our system is optimized to use one type of this. I'm going to optimize our system to have a choice here. And that's actually the refactor. Right? So you're introducing a seam of abstraction. Right? And that might be very simple. Look at refactoring from like a human perspective. During COVID, we had to damn it, I said the C word and now YouTube will probably annoy me. Sorry. Like during the pandemic, the some stores require you to identify yourself or your health state in some way, right? And then at some point we introduced a level of extraction with QR codes and certificates and whatnot, or there was an implicit contract that you are vaccinated or safe, or that it's no longer, or that you're immune, it's no longer an issue, right? So in the public, in the human processes, we have introduced natural scenes. Instead of saying you need to ID yourself or have that piece of paper, well, you need to do this QR code here, right? So the refactor might be, rather than being tightly coupled to your ID and your status, I will just tightly couple you instead to that QR code, right? So that might be a refactor. Rather than needing that other thing, I can do the ID or the QR code before you have the functionality, right? So this is called branch by abstraction. Put the abstraction in first, and that is your refactoring step, and then build the feature. And I don't mind having tickets like that. And as a manager, as a sort of somebody who oversees the task board, I don't mind having a ticket like that in my system. It might be sometimes hard to express from the perspective of the user, but sometimes you need to look at it from the perspective of the business owner or the perspective of the engineers. Sometimes who you are serving is the team. I am making this easier to work on. I am making this easier to test. Think of it, Anjana, I understand, thank you. Think of it like construction. Like construction workers have scaffolding around the object that they are building. And it doesn't serve the end users. It serves the construction workers because it makes the work environment safer. Right? So even though it cannot be expressed in a user story that serves the final customer, it is still extremely valuable. Okay. I'm going to cut it short now. So thank you for that. It's a very good question. Anjana, thank you for being with us live again, and everybody else as well. There's another comment. Anjana, I think tech debt refactoring can be implemented in today's development style. I think when you're doing this, your tickets gets a little bit bigger in average time, but your depth gets smaller. Yeah, I like this idea of time is a little bit longer, but depth gets smaller. Yeah, so you trade complicated versus complex, right? So what you're working on is complex and annoying to touch, so you make it a little bit more complicated, or you simplify it, or that metaphor is very difficult. Let's do a restaurant analogy. You can make, it's the end of the day in the kitchen. You can serve the food, but there's two problems. The kitchen is dirty. So because the kitchen is dirty, you're a bit slower in the kitchen. So now you can either decide to clean up the kitchen and then make the food, or make the food, but then the mess will be bigger. You'll spend a lot more time cleaning. So if there's another round of food to be served after that cleaning versus preparing cycle, then the best thing to do would be clean first and then make the food. Because then if you decide later, you can defer the decision of where to clean one more time, depending on whether you need to serve more food. Does that make sense? Right, so it's this decision of, you have the decision of refactor, the behavior is X. If you don't refactor, it will cost more. If you refactor, you invest something into the refactor, but the feature will be cheaper to implement. But if you refactor after, the feature will be more expensive, but the refactoring will also be more expensive. Because whatever the feature added to the system and made it more expensive also makes the refactoring more expensive. So if there's another feature after this refactor, after behavior and refactor, if there's another behavior change to this exact same component, then you're pulling the shorter, then you're losing. The lose-lose scenario is, I hacked in the behavior and then I forced myself to refactor afterwards, and then I started on a new feature. So that is the worst decision. And it's possible that the developer preceding you has made this decision. And now you can do behavior and then the refactor, or behavior refactor behavior. Because ideally, if they had finished their work, they would have refactored after themselves. But then you wouldn't have this problem. Right? So it is just the capital efficiency of the capital of your focus, let's say. it's very hard to refactor and add the behavior at the same time. And please don't do it, especially if it's not test covered. So isolate yourself to the smallest piece where you can guarantee frequency of feedback. So at least if I'm going to refactor today, I'm doing it with the purpose of writing a test. And then it's that test that will help me implement the feature faster. That's how I encourage, teams that I coach, that's how I encourage them to think about this. Because if it was easy to do, then they would be done by now not having this conversation with me. Right? If it was really easy to do, they wouldn't have come to me and asked, Dennis, I don't know, it's messy, should I refactor? It's like, if you can't do it in 2-3 hours, so if you spend the entire morning just thinking about it because you're so afraid of that part of the code base, then yes, you should refactor first. Because otherwise you'll be already done. And this happens often when people tell me, oh, Dennis, I had this quick and easy fix. Can you review it, please? And I tell them no. Because if it was quick and easy, just looking at the PR, it wouldn't take me an hour to review. So whatever happened isn't quick and easy. And if I review it and I find something, and you have to make changes to it, well, then it's not like a quick and easy. But if this is a snack, as in low effort, low value, well, if it's not quick and easy, if it wasn't done on your own, without supervision, without having, like really important decisions to be reviewed on security or safety or performance, then it's not quick and easy. Then it shouldn't be in the pipeline. Right? So, Anjana, your question here is, if it's not a snack, if it's an important feature, I would encourage you to ask the question of, what does the team agree on is the biggest problem? Is the biggest problem that we might deploy and it might break something? Is the biggest problem that we don't have confidence whether it'll work or not when I say it's done? Is the biggest problem that nobody wants to work on this? Is the biggest problem that when you work on this, a lot of people have to review it and block it and sort of second guess themselves on what to do? Just check with the team. What is the biggest issue here? What do we want to prevent? What do we want less of in the future? If you could wave your magic wand and have something disappear from the code base, some problem, some recurring problem, try to address that. These kinds of questions of, sometimes the project requires addressing some technical debt first. It is coming from a place of pain. So if there's a pain, you got to ask yourself, is the pain discomfort and frustration because we need to learn how to deal with this situation? Or is the pain coming from the fact that I'm working on something extremely complicated and we still haven't figured out how to manage that complication, how to manage the complexity and the complication of that feature? Maybe you're building something algorithmically complex and it is actually a hard problem. So you might be calling parts of the implementational craft technical debt, but maybe it's just a hard problem. Now, these are rare. So more likely it's the first part. It's like something went wrong along the way. There was a time crunch. And now there is an inherent pain because you have to learn, okay, how do I this is a complicated system. I don't know what it does. So I have to rediscover. And then there's frustration in this rediscovery. Angela says, biggest problem is it diminishes the product value in course of time. Therefore, it is difficult to convince. Okay, that's fair. So how do I understand that? Biggest problem is it diminishes the product value in course of time. Yeah, so if the problem persists, right? So that's the biggest pain of the team. Because as I mentioned, technical debt is not remediation cost. A lot of people think technical debt is the remediation cost of how expensive is it to just rewrite everything. That's the last thing you should do. Like, that's expensive, but it's not as expensive as technical debt. Technical debt is all of the self-censoring you're doing of, oh yeah, we need to make this change, but I need to touch that part of the code base, and I would rather not. Right, so it's this idea of strangling fig, dealing with legacy, isolate the code base, and start going around it, strangle it, and extract. But the strangler fig pattern is just a architectural refactoring style where you're extracting modules out of your monolith. So the real conversation to be had here, the biggest problem is it diminishes the product value in course of time. Is that why does the product value go down if we slow down how quickly we can add features to the product? Right? Because we need to think about that. If the engineering department is a profit center, that means that if I put 1 million into the engineering department, I get 2 million out. That's a profit center. This means that I want to maximize the amount of money that I put into this box. I put 1 billion in, 2 billion comes out. Right? Like Google and Amazon and big companies, they understand this. So they buy companies like this. Like there's a ceiling usually. It's like at which point adding money to the system no longer, produces diminishing returns. But you got to ask yourself the question: if we have built software and we need to keep adding features to it to make it valuable, is it valuable right now? Right? Like think about it from an economics perspective. If I put 1 million in and I get 500K out, do I want to speed up or slow down the system? My guess would be you want to slow down the system, because the more you speed it up, the faster it will burn through your money. Right? So when you say it diminishes the product value in course of time, I think it's a good thing, because it should become slower to add features to the system, because if you added them faster, it would diminish faster, right? So the value would go down much faster. The amount of money you burn would go down much faster. But that's a silly way of thinking about it, because you might have an engineering department, and the engineering department might cost you 1 million per year, let's say. Now, if the engineering department does nothing, it costs 1 million per year. If the engineering department does a lot of features, it costs 1 million per year. So whatever the engineering department is doing, it costs the same amount, unless you scale up and down. So if it costs the same, why are we talking about cost and value? Right? Like that's the really important question. Why are we talking about cost and value if the manpower that will build this or not build this is already allocated? So if you don't want to fire people, that means that whoever you keep should be working on a profit center, or at least working on something that has the potential of being a profit center when it's finished. That's the whole point of, that's the whole premise of agile and good software craftsmanship. It's like, yes, it costs now, but I'm investing into the product. I'm investing time to create a box where if I put money into it, more money comes out. Now, what I don't want is a box where I put engineering effort into it and it produces more engineering effort. That's silly, right? The money we're going to put in is probably possibly advertising or scaling it in some, some marketing idea, in some branding or reach dimension. And then the engineering effort that we need to put in is the infrastructural support of actually scaling the system once it's built. And then the more complex users will want to have, higher custom features, a higher product offering. This is a typical B2B SaaS startup. But what you want to catch yourself at is, if your product diminishes over time because you're counting the value of the product to how much features you can crank out in a month, that's a feature factory. So the cost of it is constant, but the amount of features it produces is getting smaller. Now you got to ask yourself, if revenue doesn't go up by the amount of features produced, and if the amount of features code creates more maintenance and technical debt, then is that team slowing down a bad thing? That's a hard question, because you got to be really brutally honest with yourself. if we're just creating a cost center here and we just a feature factory, we just, and I'm not saying that's your situation, but it would be a signal worth exploring. Because maybe you should slow down and instead, because slowing down is a quantitative metric. What quality means, what quality in software means generally, what it captures, we use the word quality to denote that our team can efficiently produce only that it needs to produce, right? So there is no accidental work around the actual work. That's what quality is, right? So when I want to add a simple feature and there's a lot of accidental work around it, that I would call low quality, because that's the situation you're describing. So if the amount of accidental work that I need to do to just build one simple feature is enormous, as long as that accidental quality is caused by something that is extremely valuable, then I wouldn't say that it's a bad thing that this team is slow. And the problem is, maybe you need to add features to keep the lights on that feature. Right? So maybe they're not new features, maybe they are keeping the lights on activities. And what you're doing, you're not actually adding a feature. Your ticket is not actually adding a feature. It's actually re-architecting the system that's already there to serve a larger volume of users. But that in itself is refactoring. But on an architectural function, it's architectural scale. So if you're already doing refactoring, ask yourself, why am I trying to avoid refactoring on the code level if I am already asked to do refactoring on the architectural level? Just embrace it. But have a plan. And take it seriously. If the refactoring takes a long time, make it in small steps. And small steps usually means that you know how to undo, you know how to merge it before it's done. That's continuous development, right? That's trunk-based development. Make sure you branch by abstraction so that the new architecture you're building is evolving alongside the old architecture, so that you can safely deploy it in an unfinished state and then swap over and then revert back without outage if necessary. That's really important for that kind of refactoring. So don't, if you have code that's very hard to change, don't change it. Go around it. Copy it, start refactoring the copy, test cover the copy, now that it's easier to refactor, and then see if you can swap it around. And if you can't swap it around, once you have the new system, add a seam to it, like a layer of abstraction that is compatible with both versions, and then just add this layer of abstraction into the old code, and then you can swap it. This is typical dealing with legacy code from Michael Fedris' book, Working Effectively with Legacy Code, which I thoroughly recommend for these kinds of operations. There's also Tidy First, if you want a little bit more theoretic, from Kent Beck, his newest book, and I think you can get it on O'Reilly. And there's also, on the estimation side, I would recommend Vasco Duarte's book, No Estimates. I'm reading version 1.2 right now. And this talks about what we discussed in the first half of today's talk about using story count, using the ticket count as your measure of data, and then looking at the shape of the chart as it evolves as you get data coming in. So those three together, I think I would recommend, because yeah, okay, Anjana, you're going with the swapping approach. Yeah, it's a pretty good. This is called branch by abstraction. There's also a website called Branch by Abstraction, very well endorsed by the continuous development minimum CD community. So you'll find a lot of. I also covered it in Crafting Tech Teams on one of my posts. So there's a lot of very good data on this and how to approach it. And I think you're a C#.NET environment developer, so there's probably a lot of good examples of that already in the community. So what I want to leave you with is, when you find yourself estimating, to wrap up today's conversation before I leave you with some lovely elevator music, is my ask of you today is, when you are asked to estimate, be honest with yourself that you're guessing. And if this is your first data point that you'll give to some new feature, to some new ticket, try to stop yourself and try to make the first answer you give a valid data point. And that can be as simple as, oh, you're asking me to estimate a ticket. Go to your project management board for your team and check how long on average any ticket takes, and give them that data. That will be much better than your guess. Now, if it's so large that you can't guess, then maybe you need to break it up. And you might say, oh, this looks large. I don't know how many tickets this actually is, but on average, each ticket is about 2 or 3 days. I just don't know whether this one is 1 or 5 of those. If this turns out to be really complex, let's talk about it, and then let's discuss what you want first, because I want to know what we can do in a week. Now, that is already a confidence building conversation, right? So it's not taking away your confidence, it's not taking away your control, and it's not taking away control from the stakeholder. They can still decide to kill it, they can still decide to add manpower, they can still decide to course correct and renegotiate terms. Right? So keep an open mind. What you're doing with estimates is you're not giving guarantees. You're just making sure that the timeline flows in such a way that our choices are not blocked when we need them. And that also means that if we have data, we should use the data, even if we don't like what the data says. That's the hard part. Just be brutally honest that yes, I also don't like what the data says, but the data does say that we're this slow. So I'm afraid you got a hard choice to make. We can talk about how to make it faster, but let's have that at the beginning of the project. Let's not hope. Closing your eyes and hoping is not a good business strategy. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for giving me this time to be part of your lives, because I know you're taking this time seriously, but showing up live, interacting actively on LinkedIn. I know for the Christian part of Europe, this has been All Saints Day for the past 2 days. In some countries, it's a holiday today. So again, thank you for being with me. I value you very much, and your presence very much, and your contribution in chat very much. Hello, everybody. Again, thank you for showing up, commenting, asking great questions. But now it's time for you to serve your team. Apply something you've learned today. And let me know how that goes. And if it doesn't work well, it's my fault. And then you can come tell me it's my fault, and then we can comment. We can talk about that. How's that? Then we improve on that. I think that's a great first step. I will now leave you with some lovely elevator music. And I'll see you again next week. I don't have a topic yet. I know I'm not having this stream with Adrian, but I have encouraged Adrian to start his own stream as well, so his own brand. So Adrian and I will be meeting on Wednesday on his stream, and I will then also stream on Thursday. So his stream is in the context of the CTO Fellowship and his own brand, Snackable CTO. And we'll be talking about dealing with legacy systems with the strangler fig approach that really kicked off well on the previous stream on loosely coupled architectures. So that's the plan for next week. I have changed my newsletter regiment a little bit. Now there's a little bit more detail on what's going on in the upcoming stream, what's in the old stream. Next week, so next Thursday, we're also starting a new book club cohort. This time we're reading the book Accelerate. So if you would like to join, there's always a link in the newsletter. If you're already subscribed to Crafting Tech Teams, it's down here. You can find it in Substack. It's craftingtechteams.substack.com. And if you join the cohort, we do a speed reading introduction led by me on the first call together, and then we discuss the book throughout the month. And it's possible it's the last book we read to this level of intensity this year before we take a pause for the holidays. So if you would like to join and read the book Accelerate and learn something about DevOps and DORA metrics, then you're very welcome to join. They are a lot of fun. So I'll see you Wednesday next week, on Thursday. Have a good one. Happy estimating. Don't be afraid to use the data. And when you're guessing, be aware that you're not being accurate. So be very careful not to give false confidence and false guarantees when you have data. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Ciao.